The 20th century produced a remarkable breed of sailors who undertook daring voyages of exploration, often alone or with tiny crews in modest sailboats. Below is a look at many of the most notable cruising and adventure sailors from 1900 to 2000. Joshua Slocum, first solo circumnavigator, 1895 to 1898. Nationality, Canadian-American. Vessel, a 36-foot gaff sloop, the Spray. Achievement. First person to sail around the world single-handed. Slocum set out from Boston in April 1895 on the rebuilt fishing sloop, the Spray, and returned to Newport, Rhode Island in June 1898, having sailed 46,000 miles alone over 3 years. Navigating by the sun and stars without a chronometer, he visited ports of 5 continents, rounding the major capes. His book, Sailing Alone Around the World, written in 1899, became a classic and inspired generations of ocean voyagers. Slocum's voyage proved that a lone sailor could safely circumnavigate, and the Spray's self-steering ability became legendary among mariners. Captain John Voss, Dugout Canoe World Sailing Voyage, 1901 through 1904. Nationality, Canadian. Vessel, 38-foot modified dugout canoe, Tilcomb. Achievement. One of the most audacious early small boat voyages. Inspired by Slocum's feat, Captain John Voss bought a cedar dugout canoe from the Nootaka indigenous people and refitted it with sails. In 1901, he set off from British Columbia with a partner, aiming to circumnavigate the globe. Tilcomb crossed the Pacific via Polynesia, and after his mate left, Voss sailed on with other crew joining in legs. He arrived in England in 1904, having logged about 40,000 miles in this tiny craft. Voss's harrowing journey, surviving coral reef damage, storms, and at one point losing his compass overboard, along with multiple crew changes, showcased his incredible seamanship. He later recounted his adventures in the Venturesome Voyages of Captain Voss, written in 1913, a book that became a sailing lore staple. Conor O'Brien, first yacht around Cape Horn, 1923 to 1925. Nationality, Irish. Vessel, the 42-foot ketch, Serosi. Achievement. First circumnavigation by a private yacht via the difficult Clipper route, west to east around the Great Capes. O'Brien, an accomplished sailor and boat designer, built Serosi, and in 1923 embarked from Ireland to sail around the world. Over 2 years, he rounded the Cape of Good Hope, Cape Leeuwin, and Cape Horn, becoming the first to take a small yacht around Cape Horn eastward. The voyage, completed in 1925, proved that a small crew, just O'Brien and 2 mates, could safely navigate the high southern latitudes. O'Brien's success brought him renown. He detailed it in the Across 3 Oceans book he wrote. Serosi's achievement is celebrated as a pioneering moment for amateur deep-sea cruising. Harry Pidgeon, sailing alone twice around the world, 1921 to 1925 and 1932 to 1937. Nationality, American. Vessel, a 34-foot yawl called Icelander. Achievement. Second person in history to solo circumnavigate, and the first to do it twice. A self-taught sailor and shipwright, Pidgeon built Icelander by hand on the beach in California. He departed in 1921, and like Slocum before him, sailed westward via the Panama Canal in South Africa, completing his first solo circumnavigation by 1925. Pidgeon cruised leisurely, photographing his journey and proving that an ordinary man could achieve what was once extraordinary. Remarkably, he went on to sail around the world again from 1932 to 1937, making him the first solo circumnavigator to repeat the feat. His book, Around the World Single-Handed, written in 1932, offered a humble account that inspired many post-war cruising sailors. Alain Gerbault, French solo voyager and Pacific wanderer, 1923 through 1929. Nationality, French. Vessel, 39-foot cutter, Firecrest. The first Frenchman to solo circumnavigate, known for blending sport and adventure. In 1923, Gerbault, a former fighter pilot and tennis champion, set sail from Gibraltar with minimal sailing experience, determined to cross the Atlantic alone. Succeeding in that, he continued westward from New York through the Panama Canal to the South Pacific and onward around the world. By the time he returned to France in 1929, Gerbault had sailed over 40,000 miles and became a national hero. He wrote eloquently about his voyages in quest of the sun and was admired by future greats like Bernard Moitessier. Gerbault's emphasis on the purity of life at sea and his long stretches among the Polynesian islands made him a romantic figure in cruising lore. Irving and X.E. Johnson, 7 times around the world with Yankee, 1930s through 1950s. Nationality, American. Vessel, brigantine schooners, Yankee. Achievement. Pioneers of long-distance sail training cruises. Circumnavigating the globe 7 times with amateur crews. Captain Irving Johnson and his wife, Electa X.E. Johnson, were a dynamic duo who between 1933 and 1958 took paying crews of young adventurers around the world on their schooner, the Yankee. In an era before sail training became common, the Johnsons showed that deep-sea voyaging could be wholesome and educational adventures. They completed 7 circumnavigations with different crews, visiting remote islands and ports rarely seen by yachts at the time. Their books, like Yankee Wonder World and National Geographic articles, brought the romance of voyaging to a broader audience. The Johnsons' emphasis on seamanship, cultural exploration, and camaraderie under sail inspired the later sail training and world cruising movements. Władysław Wagner, the Polish Pathfinder, 1932 through 1939. Nationality, Polish. Vessel, 32-foot yawl, Suwałka and later Suwałka II. Achievement. First Pole to sail around the world. In 1932, 20-year-old Wagner set out from Poland with 2 friends on a tiny yawl. Initially just aiming for a summer adventure, that journey turned into a 7-year global odyssey, completed solo by Wagner by 1939. He weathered the Depression years by working in ports along the way, and even switching to a new boat mid-voyage after a wreck. Wagner's perseverance led him through the Panama Canal, across the Pacific and Indian Oceans, and around the Cape of Good Hope. His successful circumnavigation, documented in By the Sun and the Stars, was a point of pride for Poland. Wagner's feat, though lesser known in the West, opened doors for later Eastern European long-distance sailors. Vito Dumas, Alone Through the Roaring Forties, 1942 through 1943. Nationality, Argentinian. Vessel, the 31-foot ketch, Lehigh II. Achievement. First single-handed circumnavigation of the Southern Ocean, rounding the 3 Great Capes alone during World War II. In 1942, with the world at war, Dumas set sail from Buenos Aires on an eastern route that forced him into the high latitudes, roaring 40s, for months. He became the first solo sailor to round Cape Horn, Cape of Good Hope, and the Cape Leeward in one voyage, battling relentless gales, huge seas, and isolation. Dumas made only a few wartime port calls when permitted, and completed his circumnavigation in 1943. His book, Alone Through the Roaring Forties, vividly narrates survival amid constant storms. Dumas' voyage was a tour de force of seamanship and tenacity. He showed that even the most fearsome ocean route could be accomplished by a determined solo sailor, earning him a place as a Cape Horn legend. Eric and Suzanne Hiscock, cruising's first couple, 1952 through 1955 and beyond. Nationality, British. Vessel, 30-foot cutter, Wanderer 3, and later Wanderer 4 and 5. Achievement. Early examples of voyaging as a lifestyle. Authors of influential cruising guides, Eric and Suzanne Hiscock, set sail from England in 1952 on Wanderer 3 and spent 3 years leisurely sailing westward around the globe via Panama and the Cape of Good Hope. At a time when few people sailed the world for pleasure, their successful circumnavigation from 1952 through 1955 made headlines. The Hiscocks documented that trip in Around the World in Wanderer 3, sharing practical lessons and philosophy that resonated with post-war sailors. They didn't stop there. The couple completed 2 more circumnavigations in larger wanderers in 1960s and 70s. Equally adept at writing, they produced classics like Cruising Under Sail and won multiple awards for their contributions to cruising. The Hiscock's Voyage, executed without engine and minimal fuss, set the standard for a husband and wife world cruising duo and inspired countless others. Miles and Beryl Smeton, survival around Cape Horn, 1950s through 1960s. Nationality, British, but later Canadian residents. Vessel, a 46-foot ketch, Zhuhang. Achievement. Survived 2 catastrophic capsize incidents near Cape Horn, then succeeded on later attempts. Authors of survival sailing classics. Former overland explorers and mountaineers, the Smetons turned to ocean sailing with an appetite for high adventure. In 1956 through 1957, they voyaged from England towards the Pacific, intending to round Cape Horn eastbound. As Zhuhang approached the Horn in February 1957, a rogue wave pitch-bowled the boat, flipping it end over end. Beryl, on watch, was thrown overboard, safety lines hauling her back in, and the yacht's mast was snapped off. Miraculously, all of them, including a young crewmate and future author John Guswell, jerry-rigged Zhuhang and limped 2,000 miles to Chile. Undetermined, the Smetons tried again in 1958, only to be dismasted by a storm near the same area. Their hair-raising story, told in Once Is Enough, became a must-read tale of seamanship and persistence. Finally, in 1968, the indomitable couple successfully sailed Zhuhang westbound around Cape Horn. The Smetons are revered by sailors for their cool handling of disaster and their adventurous spirit, which also led them to high-latitude cruising and global wandering in later years. H.W. Bill Tillman, High Latitudes and Mountaineering by Sail, 1955 through 1977. Nationality, British. Vessel, 45-foot, pilot cutter Mischief and later Seabreeze and Baroque. Achievements. Blended sailing and exploration, voyaging to remote Arctic and Antarctic waters with small crews to climb uncharted peaks. Bill Tillman was already a famed mountaineer when in his late 40s he bought Mischief, and in 1954 he turned to the sea as a means to reach inaccessible mountains. Over the next 2 decades, Tillman led a series of minimalist expeditions. He sailed Mischief and successive vessels to Patagonia, Heard Island, Greenland, and Antarctica, usually with just 3 or 4 companions and limited gear. These voyages, often in iceberg-strewn seas, were done in the spirit of true exploration. Tillman's style was famous. His crew advertisements read, "Crew wanted for long voyage in small boat. No pay, no prospects, not much pleasure." Yet adventurous souls eagerly signed on. Once at their remote destination, Tillman and crew would trade oilskins for ice axes and attempt first ascents of mountains. His book, Mischief in Patagonia, High Mountains and Cold Seas, recounted both absurd hardships and triumphs. In 1977, at nearly 80, Tillman disappeared at sea en route to climb in the South Atlantic. He left behind a legacy as perhaps the last of the gentlemen adventurers, proving that small yachts could reach the ends of the earth. Bernard Moitessier, The Philosopher of the Seas, 1963 through 1969. Nationality, French, born in Vietnam. Vessel, a 39-foot catch, Joshua. Achievement. Completed 1.5 circumnavigations nonstop, famously forfeiting a race victory to save his soul. Bernard Moitessier's name is synonymous with the spiritual side of long-distance sailing. After sailing from Southeast Asia to France in the early 60s on a junk and then a self-boat-built adventures he described in Sailing to the Reefs, Moitessier entered the 1968 Sunday Times Golden Globe race, the first solo non-stop round-the-world race. As an already skilled sailor, he departed last, but steadily caught up in the competition. Approaching the finish back in England in 1969, Moitessier had made the fastest circumnavigation. Yet instead of returning to claim the prize, he kept sailing Joshua past the finish, continuing on for an extra half circuit of the globe to Tahiti. In a message he slingshotted on a passing ship's deck, he wrote, "Continuing nonstop because I am happy at sea and perhaps to save my soul." Moitessier's decision to reject material rewards and embrace the purity of the journey captivated the world. His memoir, The Long Way, became a Bible for long-distance sailors, and his life inspired many to view ocean sailing as more than a sport, as a route to simplicity, freedom, and inner peace. Sir Francis Chichester, solo circumnavigation with one stop, 1966 through 1967. Nationality, British. Vessel, the 53-foot catch Gypsy Moth 4. Achievement. First single-handed circumnavigation with only one port of call. At the time, the fastest circumnavigation ever by a small vessel. Already a famed aviator and solo racer, Sir Francis Chichester set out from England in 1966 at the age of 65 to challenge the limits of what a lone sailor could do. He sailed Gypsy Moth 4 eastward via Cape of Good Hope, stopped only in Sydney, Australia for repairs, and then continued via Cape Horn back to England. This 28,500-mile voyage took about 9 months, 226 days at sea. It made Chichester a household name. He was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II, using Chichester's own ship's boom as the sword, soon after finishing. Chichester's exploits, battling high Southern Ocean seas as an older sailor, showed that age and adversity were no barriers. His book Gypsy Moth circles the world, and his achievements spurred interest in long-distance racing and inspired the next wave of solo circumnavigators. Sir Alec Rose, the shopkeeper who sailed the world, 1967 through 1968. Nationality, British. Vessel, the 36-foot yawl, Lively Lady. Achievement. Solo circumnavigated with 2 stopovers at the age of 59, becoming a folk hero for amateur sailors. Alec Rose was a grocer by profession and a weekend sailor who dreamed of following Chichester's wake. In 1967, he set sail on his sturdy wooden yawl, Lively Lady. With no sponsorship and little fanfare, Rose made stops in Australia and New Zealand during his voyage. He overcame a knockdown in the Southern Ocean and self-repaired his boat along the way, arriving back in England after 354 days. Rose was greeted by cheering crowds and a knighthood for doing the impossible. His down-to-earth manner and determination resonated deeply. He proved that an ordinary person with passion could accomplish an extraordinary sailing feat. Lively Lady's journey, recounted in Rose's book, My Lively Lady, also raised funds for charity, reflecting his generous spirit. Sir Robin Knox-Johnston, first solo non-stop circumnavigator, 1968 through 1969. Nationality, British. Vessel, the 32-foot ketch, Suhaili. Achievement. First person to sail solo around the world nonstop. Robin Knox-Johnston achieved what many thought impossible when he won the 1968 to 69 Golden Globe race, the pioneering single-handed nonstop circumnavigation competition. Unlike some rivals with cutting-edge boats, Knox-Johnston sailed a modest, home-built wooden ketch, Suhaili, which was sturdy but slow. He endured 312 days alone at sea, rounding the 3 Great Capes without setting foot ashore. Along the way, he survived a near capsize, water shortages, and a painful stomach ulcer, yet he pressed on. In April 1969, Knox-Johnston returned to Falmouth, UK, the sole finisher of the race, and promptly donated his prize money to the family of a competitor lost at sea. This historic voyage made him a national hero and earned him a knighthood. Sir Robin's accomplishment proved unequivocally that solo nonstop circumnavigation was possible, ushering in a new era of around-the-world races and records. Decades later, he would continue setting records, like being the oldest to circumnavigate nonstop at the age of 67 in 2007. But Sue Haley's first voyage remains his crowning legacy. Robin Lee Graham, teenage circumnavigator 1965 through 1970. Nationality, American. Vessel, a 24-foot sloop, Dove. Later, 33-foot ketch. Achievement. Youngest solo circumnavigator of the time, completing a 5-year coming-of-age voyage. In 1965, at the age of 16 years old, Robin Lee Graham set out from California alone in his tiny sloop, Dove. Over the next 5 years, he crossed the Pacific, fell in love, meeting his future wife in Fiji, survived multiple boat breakages, including a dismasting that required switching to a larger boat, and slowly made his way around the world before turning 21. Graham's youth and openness about the emotional ups and downs of life at sea captivated people back home through a series of articles in National Geographic. By the time he sailed into Los Angeles in 1970, he had become a symbol of free-spirited adventure for the new generation. His memoir, Dove, chronicles not just the navigation and exotic landfalls, but the inner journey of a teenager becoming an adult out on the ocean. Robin's achievement, though with a few short stretches of crew assistance, stood as the youngest ever record for decades and encouraged many young sailors to pursue long-distance cruising. Chay Blyth, Westward Around the World Against the Odds, 1971. Nationality, British. Vessel, the 59-foot ketch, British steel. Achievement. First person to sail non-stop westward, east to west, around the world alone. A grinding upwind circumnavigation. Chay Blyth was a British Army sergeant with no sailing background, who burst onto the scene by rowing across the Atlantic in 1966 with John Ridgway. Never one to shy away from a challenge, Blyth took on what was dubbed as an impossible voyage, sailing solo the wrong way around the globe, against prevailing winds and currents. In 1970 through 1971, aboard British Steel, Blyth rounded Cape Horn westward, battling constant headwinds in the Southern Ocean. The voyage was 292 days nonstop, filled with massive waves, gear failures, and physical hardships. Blyth's completion of the first westward solo navigation in 1971 astonished the sailing world. He was named UK Yachtsman of the Year and knighted for this feat. Blyth's gritty voyage, told in his book The Impossible Voyage, proved that sheer will and stamina could overcome what many considered an insurmountable route. It also underscored the vast difference that wind direction makes. His westward circumnavigation took far longer and was arguably way tougher than the faster eastward routes. Kenichi Horie, lone trans-Pacific sailor 1962 and circumnavigator 1974. Nationality, Japanese. Vessel, a 19-foot plywood sloop, the Mermaid, in 1962, and a 32-foot sloop, Kurumata, in 1974. Achievement. First person to sail solo nonstop across the Pacific Ocean and later one of the first Japanese to solo circumnavigate. In 1962, 23-year-old Kenichi Horie slipped away from Osaka in a tiny homemade sloop named Mermaid, carrying minimal provisions and no passport. After 94 days alone at sea, he sailed into San Francisco, having become the first solo, non-stop, trans-Pacific sailor. Initially detained for entering the U.S. without documentation, Horie soon became an international celebrity. San Francisco's mayor granted him honorary citizenship and the key to the city. Horie's achievement showed that long ocean crossing were within reach for small boats and modest budgets. He chronicled this in Kuduku, Alone on the Pacific. Far from resting on his laurels, Horie completed a solo circumnavigation in 1974, sailing east about around the world, and undertook numerous other innovative voyages, including sailing a solar-powered boat and a pedal-powered boat in later years. As of the 20th century, Horie had become a living legend in Japan, demonstrating by personal example that youth and determination can conquer the biggest oceans. Remarkably, he continues sailing into his 80s, setting the record at 83 for the oldest solo Pacific crossing. Krystyna Chojnowska-Liskiewicz, first woman to sail solo around the world, 1976 through 1978. Nationality, Polish. Vessel, a 31-foot sloop, Mazurek. Achievement, earned the distinction of being the first woman to complete a solo circumnavigation. An engineer and shipyard naval architect by training, Krystyna quietly set sail from the Canary Islands in 1976 in her Polish-built yacht, Mazurek. She sailed westward through the Panama Canal, across the Pacific and Indian Oceans, and around to the Cape of Good Hope, returning to her starting point in March 1978, covering about 31,000 nautical miles and 401 days at sea. She beat out, just by a couple of months, her British rival, Naomi James, for the honor of the first woman around the globe alone. Krystyna's voyage, achieved with limited fanfare and resources, was a trailblazing moment for female sailors. Upon her return to Poland, she was celebrated with the country's highest honors. Her success opened the door for many women to embark on ambitious solo voyages, proving that skill and courage know no gender. Naomi James, the first woman to solo circumnavigate via Cape Horn, 1977 through 1978. Nationality, British, born in New Zealand. Vessel, the 53-foot sloop Express Crusader. Achievement, broke the glass ceiling in solo sailing by becoming the first woman to sail solo via Cape Horn and setting a speed record in the process. Naomi James learned to sail only 2 years before she set off on her round-the-world attempt. Inspired by Chichester and encouraged by her husband, in September 1977, she departed Dartmouth, UK, and swooped south. James braved the wild seas of the Southern Ocean alone, capably rounding Cape Horn. After one stop in New Zealand for repairs, she returned to England in June 1978. Not only was she the first woman to take on the Horn solo, she also knocked 2 days off Sir Francis Chichester's circumnavigation time, completing hers in just 272 days. Naomi James was knighted Dame for this achievement. Her book, At One with the Sea, recounts knockdowns, a near capsize, and the challenges of loneliness. By proving women could handle the toughest route, Naomi James solidified a place for female sailors in the annals of ocean adventuring. Tania Aebi, Round the World Voyage of the Girl Next Door, 1985 through 1987. Nationality, American Swiss. Vessel, the 26-foot sloop Varuna. Achievement, one of the youngest women to solo circumnavigate, and a pioneering example of youth sailing for personal growth. In 1985, at the age of 18, Tania cast off from New York with minimal sailing experience, undertaking a solo circumnavigation as a coming-of-age journey, a deal with her father in lieu of college tuition. Over the next 2+ years, Tania sailed Varuna around the globe via Panama and Suez canals, learning as she went. She had a few adventurous stopovers, including taking on a friend as crew for one short 80-mile leg, disqualifying her from an official record of unassisted status. By the time she returned to New York in 1987 at the age of 21, Tania had logged 27,000 miles and became a media sensation. Her honest and unvarnished memoir, Maiden Voyage, inspired countless young people, and especially young women, to pursue sailing. While not the absolute youngest ever, Tania was the first American woman to solo circumnavigate with stopovers, and her voyage blended adventure, romance, and self-discovery, which endeared her to a generation of readers. Kay Cottee, the first woman to sail nonstop and unassisted around the world, 1987 through 1988. Nationality, Australian. Vessel, 37-foot cutter, First Lady. Achievement. In 1988, Kay etched her name in history by becoming the first woman to complete a solo, nonstop, unassisted circumnavigation of the globe. Setting out in November 1987 from Sydney, Kay sailed First Lady north of New Zealand, around the Cape Horn, then across the Atlantic, Indian, and Southern Oceans without a single port call. She spent 189 days at sea, alone the whole way. Kay faced several trials, including a knockdown south of Africa that left her unconscious and with her yacht's mast nearly in the water. Nevertheless, she carried on to sail back to Sydney Harbor in June 1988 to a hero's welcome. Her voyage, meticulously planned and executed, demonstrated a high level of seamanship. Kay was named Australian of the Year and honored internationally. In her book, First Lady, she recounted the mental challenges of isolation and the euphoria of achieving her dream. Kay's feat was a milestone that firmly established women in the top tier of solo sailing achievements. Jon Sanders, triple circumnavigation extraordinaire, 1986 through 1988. Nationality, Australian. Vessel, 47-foot sloop, Perry Endeavour. Achievement. World record, 3 consecutive circumnavigations nonstop. Jon Sanders took long-distance solo sailing to staggering heights, or rather lengths, in 1980s. Having already circumnavigated solo twice, Sanders set out from Australia in 1986 with the goal of looping the planet 3 times without stopping, a feat never attempted before. He sailed an eastward course in the roaring Southern Ocean and incredibly stayed at sea for 657 days straight, covering over 71,000 nautical miles. By the time he returned in 1988, Sanders had completed a triple circumnavigation, setting multiple records in the process. He withstood unimaginable fatigue, solitude, and a full fury of every ocean multiple times over. This marathon voyage earned him a place in the Guinness Book of World Records and deep respect for the sailing community, though Sanders himself underplayed it with typical Aussie modesty. Even after accomplishing this superhuman journey, he continued voyaging, eventually totaling 10 circumnavigations by the 2020s. Sanders' triple loop remains one of the most prestigious individual efforts in sailing history, a demonstration of endurance that borders on the unbelievable. Amir Klink, Antarctica Circuit, 1998 through 1999. Nationality, Brazilian. Vessel, 50-foot steel yacht, Parati. Achievement. First solo yachtsman to circumnavigate Antarctica around the Southern Ocean alone. In 1998, he departed from South Georgia and sailed a figure 8 around the Antarctic continent, an extremely high-latitude route known as one of the most perilous. Klink spent 88 days at sea for this polar circumnavigation, enduring icy storms, constant cold, and isolation. He skillfully used weather systems to slingshot him around icebergs and through the treacherous Weddell Sea, timing his voyage at the end of Antarctic summer. By the time he looped back to his starting point in 1999, Klink had achieved what was dubbed the Antarctic 360, the first solo circumnavigation of the frozen continent. This feat required not only sailing talent, but a deep understanding of polar conditions and immense mental fortitude. Klink was already known for audacious expeditions, including a solo row across the South Atlantic in 1984. But this Antarctic voyage cemented his status as a modern legend. His book, Endless Sea, shares the lessons from navigating in the world's harshest seas. Klink's success showed that even the most extreme latitudes were within reach of well-prepared single-handers, further expanding the realm of possibilities for adventure sailors. The sailors above, hailing from different nations and spanning a century, each left an indelible mark in maritime history. They sailed not for trophies, but for the love of the journey, whether it was circling the globe alone, seeking out unfrequented ice-chopped waters, or trusting a small boat to carry them through. Their exploits fueled the imaginations of generations of cruising sailors,